afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all and our esteemed panelists once again to the second in the series of the stakeholder consultation that IRMA is hosting on COVID-19, business and society. Shivanshi, COVID-19 and society. Sorry. Just a sec. I think, yeah, now it is. Now it is done. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Today we are going to discuss overcoming challenges of job loss and unemployment due to the lockdown in the agriculture and MSME sectors. So this is what we are going to discuss. Although the topic narrows down the discussions to the challenges of job loss and unemployment in the agriculture and MSME sectors, we'll try to dissect the bottom of the issue, which revolves around the migrant workers and their woes. Therefore, to set the tone of today's consultation or discussion, I would like to take you through a small presentation of 8 minutes, and then we will invite our speakers to offer their valuable comments or viewpoints on the subject. So let me begin with a quote that the former US President Truman said. He says, I quote, "It's a recession when your neighbor loses his job. It's a depression when you lose yours," unquote. And this is so true that it is a recession for us because we haven't lost our jobs, and that is why we are assembled here discussing, engaging in discussions. Whereas it is a depression, a great depression for them. I mean, the workers, migrant workers, who are undergoing sufferings, huge amount of sufferings, mental and psychological trauma, and uncertainties. And this prompts me to read out a voice of concern, a poem which has been written by a very dear friend of mine, Mr. Mohit Chadha. It's in Hindi, though, but we have tried to give you the translated version just besides it. We'll try to, reach out to you with this poem, which says that अब ना रुकूंगा तेरे लिए, गांव की मिट्टी बुलाती है, भाग्य में हुआ तो फिर मिलेंगे, अभी बस मुझको जाना है, आया था तेरे शहर बसाने को, अपने बच्चों का भाग्य बनाने को, रोटी घर पर भी मिलती थी, बूढ़ी माँ कपड़े सिलती थी, अब अपना फर्ज निभाना है, माता पिता का कर्ज चुकाना है, तेरा सोचा देश का सोचा, समय नहीं था अपने लिए सोच पाने को, आया था तेरा शहर बसाने को, अपने बच्चों का भाग्य बनाने को, खुद जला तेरे उद्योग चलाने को, अब कुछ बचा नहीं खोने को और पाने को, तुझे मालिक कहा वही किया जो तूने कहा, झूठे आश्वासन, झूठे ढाढ़स, झूठे सपने, बस बहुत हुआ, बस बहुत हुआ, बस बहुत हुआ, अब दिल ने कहा, आया था तेरा शहर बसाने को, अपने बच्चों का भाग्य बनाने को, हाँ तूने राशन पहुंचाया, तू दाता मैं दीन कहलाया, फोटो खिंचवा कर तू इठलाया, मुझे दीन से हीन बनाया, आया था तेरा शहर बसाने को, अपने बच्चों का भाग्य बनाने को, अब ना रुकूंगा तेरे लिए, गांव की मिट्टी बुलाती है, भाग्य में हुआ तो फिर मिलेंगे, अभी बस मुझको जाना है. So this poem, as well as the picture, they are self-explanatory, and I don't have to really say anything beyond it. But who these migrant workers are? Article 19(1)(d) and Article 19(1)(e) of the Constitution of India gives a citizen the fundamental rights to move freely within India, work anywhere, and reside in any part of the country. Now, then the question is that why are they called migrants if they have to they have so much, they have that right, a fundamental right that they can move anywhere within the country. So anyway, that is a different discussion altogether. But if we are looking at migrants, then there are different types of migrant. But today we are going to talk about one particular type of migrant who do 3D jobs. 3D stands for 1D difficult, dangerous, and third D is demeaning, which cannot be performed or done by the local populations or residents in cities and towns, and that is why these so-called poor people living in the rural areas who are deprived of their livelihood. So they take this as an opportunity to come over to these cities and take this kind of 3D work, in the area of construction, agriculture, textile, and they are home workers, street vendors, porters, drivers, security guards, cleaners, and scavengers. So what is the number of the migrant workers? Census of migrant workers is the major concern. Uh, we don't have yet clear-cut data on migrant workers that reflects on the current number of migrant workers. As per a rough estimation, and also I was trying to research out, and I found that as per rough estimation, there are approximately 12 crore migrant workers of this type, which Mr. Gulati and Mr. Bhardwaj can correct me, of this type, who are employed in the unorganized, informal economy and agriculture, including MSME sector, and do 3D type of work. And where are they from? So they are largely from the eastern states of Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, West Bengal, and Chhattisgarh, after UP and Rajasthan from the north. And the recent trend, we can see the recent trend is that migration can be seen happening from northeastern states to down south in Kerala and etc. And then their key destinations are Delhi, Mumbai, Gujarat, Haryana, Karnataka, Punjab, and Tamil Nadu. If you look at the hotspots, the deep red, it's very disturbing. It's all over, all across, and especially you can see the almost entire UP and Bihar and Jharkhand. So they are now hotspots of migrants. So what are the key issues? Key issues to me is the exclusion of these migrant workers. Despite they are very inclusive in the system, because they are the support system, and they provide their supports to the existing society and communities. Yet they are excluded. Exclusion is social because our host communities, our host society, they are very apathetic towards migrant workers. Legal, because we don't have legal protection or say regulatory or administrative protection to these workers. Economic, given the opportunity, everyone wants to exploit these workers, on salaries and other things. And humanitarian, because a huge amount of discrimination which are based on ethnicity, religion, class or gender, etc. But if you look at this particular graph, Kerala is the only state which is trying to treat and give somewhat equal status to migrant workers at par the local citizens or residents, and all other states you can see, they are, just a second, they are below 50% mark on the score of 100. So migrant workers, whose responsibility? Home states or host states, governments or employers? So this is a biggest dilemma, this is the biggest confusion. So this is the state of affair of migrant workers who do 3D works, difficult, dangerous and demeaning, and yet their fate with regard to jobs and employment is absolutely uncertain. COVID-19 happened and we witnessed this. Very recently we have seen, during the lockdown period, employers did not support these workers. They lost their jobs. Host states or their respective governments failed in providing social protections to these workers. Home states, very surprisingly, they are not willing to take them back. They are not prepared even to rehabilitate them, at least during this period of emergency. And finally, big corporations, I don't mean by saying that big corporations all know, barring a few, big corporations did not extend their support beyond the limit of CSR funding or funds, which they are obliged to spend under the law. So this is the reality with regard to the situations around migrant workers. So we are exposed, our society is exposed, we are exposed to many underlying things that need to be debated and discussed. Why is that we as a society have failed to look after those who looked after us, who are life support for us? And this is what, in fact, we are going to discuss. This is what this learned panel of today is going to discuss and give their critical observations, suggestions, recommendations. How inclusion of our migrant workers is going to be critical and important. So we are going to discuss. So now I'm going to moderate this session. I'm going to reach out to all four, our speakers, and we have say 4 rounds of question answers. But our questions are going to discuss around these 4 major points. So migrant workers in the agriculture and MSME sector, global to local, and their plights, the causes and cure, legal protection. We have, many of you would not be aware that India has one act which is called the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979. So what happened to its implementation and what are the effectiveness? So we'll discuss that. Current crisis under COVID regime and its impact on poverty, hunger, unemployment vis-a-vis challenges for the recovery of MSME and agriculture. And the last one is the quality of life. I'm not saying standard of living, quality of life of migrant workers, which means dignity, social safety net, and improvement in their overall economic and social status. And finally, we will definitely ask their recommendations, suggestions, which definitely we will try to bring together, and if possible, we can forward it to the Government of India. So with this, I stop here, and I'm going to ask the first question of this round to Bimal. Bimal, so since you have the exposure to the global scenario, as well as since you are from India, you have lived in India, so you know the global as well as India both. So now I want to know from you, rather we want to know from you, how are the MSMEs in India similar and different from their counterparts in developed economies? And how much organized are MSME workers in those developed economies, and how protected under the laws and social safety nets? Uh, uh, and what should India learn from the MSMEs of developed economies? Over to you, Bibal.
Thank you so much, Sudhir. Thank you for inviting. Thank you for setting the context. It's always a pleasure. The learned panel members, we go a long way, all friends. So yes, coming to this important topic and question that we are dealing with today, I have indeed. I am from India, and I've been living in UK for almost about 15 plus years now. And I have had the opportunity to observe and understand some of these issues and challenges. I have researched about it. I have written about some of related issues. See, coming to the question that you asked, basically, definitionally, if I say, there is no difference among MSMEs in developed and developing countries to me. My co-panelists may differ though, but for me, conceptually speaking, MSMEs are defined worldwide by their size, resources, and characteristics such as their ability to generate employment, to provide services, products, and contribution to the economy. I mean, all has been said. I don't have to go into that. The difference, however, lies to me in the regulatory environment, the regulatory capacities, structural differences, and the quality of institutions and processes. I think that's where primarily I see the issue here. Two Indian origin professors in Harvard Business School, with their observations and research, particularly in India, they developed a theory called theory of institutional void, and which basically refers to kind of absence or underdevelopment of specialized institutions, and they being scholars of business strategy, They were largely referring to institutions or intermediaries like database vendors, quality certification agencies, control, mechanisms that are required. But I think this whole idea of institutional void is very much applicable to the context of India as we see them. So that brings me to the next part of your question in terms of the MSME workers and their institutions and organizations and social safety nets. In this part of the world, the so-called developed part of the world, there are mechanisms and institutions and processes which are much more mature. Workers who have been affected are covered. Generally, they are covered. The social safety nets are there. Therefore, the impact on workers here is relatively different from what we see in India. Plus, the kind of packages that have been announced in UK, for instance, the government, when this happened and the government of UK came out with a package. I mean, we can debate on different aspects of it, but the important and interesting thing which I note is the furlough scheme which they offered to the employers, saying that 80% of the salaries will be covered for next 3 months, for instance, and then they're extended now to October. So there were ways of supporting that, and there were organizations and organized systems of workers which have been constantly engaging and lobbying with the government for different kinds of packages and relief in this process. So given broadly, just to conclude, my point here is the quality of institutions matter, the processes and the capacity to develop those processes matter, and I think to some extent we lack in many kind of institutions and processes. I'm going to be talking more later, but for now, I think this is where I would want to conclude. Thank you.
So, thank you, Bimal. Now I move on to the second question, which is to Mr. Datta, and the question goes like this: what are the actual problems of agriculture workers in general and under the regime of COVID-19 in particular? What are your specific recommendations for overcoming these challenges of farm workers? So over to you, Mr. Datta.
Thank you, Professor Sinha. Thanks to Irma for inviting me. I have a very easy answer. It's a one-line answer that what Vimal talked about the MSME structure, sector, it's exactly the same for the agriculture sector. It's lack of strong institutions, it's lack of proper regulation, it's lack of ability to implement laws. So it's exactly the same. Now, since I have about a couple of minutes, let me try to elaborate a bit more. Agriculture workers were not recognized even pre-COVID, in spite of all the regulations and laws which are there. If you look at from a social safety perspective, if you look at entitlement, if you look at access to finance, access to services, they didn't have any of that because nobody knew who they were. They were not registered anywhere. And for example, I mean, I can always give a banking perspective. The most difficult thing for a agriculture worker is to avail a loan. In spite of the government of India having, come up with schemes, especially for agriculture laborers and agriculture workers, no bank is willing to give them a loan because they cannot be identified to a particular address which can be verified. It's as simple as that. Now, once that means all formal institutions do not want to recognize you. So far, this entire, migration of laborers, agriculture workers, both in the semi-formal sector and in the informal sector, it was going on. All of us knew how much Indian agriculture was dependent on on these workers. We also debate a lot about the impact of Manrega on agriculture workers. We also debated a lot on what kind of minimum wages should be that. But now, this now we have lifted the carpet and we can see a lot of dirt, that important things have not been discussed, and there is absolutely no implementation capacity, whether in the home state or in the receiving state, to protect the interest of the workers. They are simply people with no identities in the place they work. It's as simple as that. Now, post-COVID, obviously the labor in agriculture sector needs to be there, otherwise agriculture will come to a standstill. So two trends which will happen, I'll speak more about that. One is mechanization, which was already happening, which is going to now get hastened. We have already started seeing that. I mean, increased sale of tractors and farm implements and mechanization tools and all of that. And second is more use of technology. Now, there's nothing per se wrong with both of them if they can increase productivity at the farm level. But the debate that we didn't have time to have when COVID hit us is, how does it impact laborers and what do they do when they are forced out of business, and how do they reskill into the new requirements? More of that later, Professor. You're on mute, sir.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Mr. Datta. So now I welcome Mr. Anil Bhardwaj, who has joined in. Are you there, Mr. Bhardwaj?
Yes, I'm very much there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining. So my next question to you, right away, sir. So what are the challenges of the MSMEs with regard to the with regard to the employment of migrant workers? Although the MSME sector employs a significant number of migrant workers and contributes up to 40% to the country's economy, the conditions of these workers are very pitiable. Is it right that FISME has gone silent on securing the rights and welfare of workers in the MSME sector? Does FISME favor the interest of entrepreneurs only and therefore ignore workers? Over to you, Mr. Bhardwaj.
First of all, thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to share my views. See, first of all, MSMEs and small farmers suffer from the similar handicaps. Suboptimal size of operations, uncompetitive and vulnerable and unable to access most government support. Then one important issue also brings them together is the rate of suicide. You would be surprised that although people say that, it's the farmers that make news in aspect of committing suicide, but the reports, particularly the study conducted by Professor Vivek Debroy, said the number of self-employed people committing suicide is even higher than small farmers. So to that extent, they have tremendous similarities. Now, coming back to the specific question that you have raised, actually that question needs to be nuanced a bit. First of all, there is an urban and rural divide. What happens is that in the rural setting, 50% of MSMEs are based in rural areas. And mostly there, it is not the migratory labor, but it is the people who are living in nearby villages that ultimately come. So the problem of migratory labor is primarily an urban problem. Now there also, when you say, when we hear this term, that terms need to be deconstructed quite a bit. So in migratory labor, you have construction workers, you have sundry labor like loaders, transport sector, self-employed people, pushcart sellers, street vendors, employed in factories and direct payrolls, employed under contractors, etc. In MSMEs, the number of people employed by the migratory labor are concentrated in certain areas only and in certain sectors. For example, textile and garments. So if you go to Coimbatore, you will find that a large number of people large number of people who are, working there are from Bihar or West Bengal or eastern part of UP. Then in Surat also you will find the similar situation, in Mumbai also. But otherwise, quite a large number of people are from the nearby areas who ultimately come and join. Now, your assertion that FISME has been silent on these issues, particularly related to the woes of the migratory labor. Well, partly it is because we have been focused, we are an advocacy group focused on primarily on the pains of the micro, small and medium enterprises, which are comparatively organized. And they have been facing quite a bit of problems. In democracy, after all interest groups have to form their advocacy arms. MSMEs are also not very well organized, but whosoever is organized, they form advocacy groups in the form of federations like FISME. And we have been trying to get the similar kind of assistance to secure the wages, as, for example, Mr. Arora has just said, what has been done in UK. And we conducted quite a large number of parleys with different arms of the government and tried to convince them that in order to keep workers during lockdown, government has to come out and support MSMEs. Otherwise, it would not be possible to keep workers under lockdown. And unfortunately, no such support came in during the last 2 months. What we finally came about is a loan scheme that too, if you had an outstanding loan at a given moment of time, 20% additional loan could be given without collateral. That's all that the scheme currently has. So there are so many ifs and buts. It is not yet operationalized. When it will be operationalized, we don't know. So there's no doubt. Recently, even today, it has come out in Economic Times and other newspapers. Scotch Group and FISME together conducted a survey of around 200 MSMEs, which were primarily in the NCR region. And what we gather is that almost 62% of them are shedding workforce from 25% to 100%. So, depending on 25%, 50%, depending on the sector you are in, the kind of orders you are getting, whether you're allowed to work or open or not. But 62% is a sizable number, and that tells you that without external support, it is not possible to keep employment on rolls. So yes, they are also sufferers equally as the employees are. And this notion of an employer, as you say, typically an industrialist and the workers that are that used to work in factories, is not correct in the case of MSMEs. The average size of employment in MSMEs is less than 2, which means essentially most or large number of MSMEs are nothing but self-employed people, maybe one person working around them, maybe a family member, maybe a young chap who's assisting them, and that's all. So once we deconstruct this term of migratory labor and we understand the nuances of MSMEs, we realize that the problem could have been averted with the proper assistance. And this notion that we have been silent, or MSMEs have been silent on the woes of workers, is not really correct.
So I take your point. I think yes, there are some genuine internal challenges that you have to overcome as a sector. But yes, so thank you very much for your viewpoints. Now I move on to Mr. Mukesh Gulati, and my question to him is, why workers in the MSME sector, in your assessment, despite being the backbone, are still vulnerable? What lacks in our system and society in giving such workers moral as well as legal shielding from the risk of job loss, unemployment, which push them further into impoverishment? So over to you, Mukeshji.
Thank you, Professor Sinha. As I am hearing you and also looking into what the topic of the discussion today is, I was actually looking at it when the title was given as MSMEs and the implications on the workers. But as I am now realizing that the focus is actually much more on the worker side, and therefore, since we are looking at on the worker side, I would rather like to say that I have limitations in my ability to understand how the position between the MSMEs as an employer and workers as employed stands today. So I would rather like to speak out of maybe some impressions that I carry rather than being an authority in this area. So when I look at this component, I think let's begin with the issue of which size of enterprise are we talking about? Today, I think more than 50% of all
फैन बंद
MSMEs,
कर लाइट
probably
नहीं
52% of
फैन
them,
बंद कर दो
huh?
Please go ahead. I think.
Acha. I think more than 50% of all MSMEs are essentially rural enterprises. The second important component that we need to remember is that probably more than 90% of all enterprises are either one person or two-person show. So therefore, the line between who is an employer and who is an employee is very fuzzy in this particular context. Most of the time when we begin to debate this kind of an issue, we essentially take the aspect of maybe an enterprise which has maybe 20 workers working in that area. But we often have, fuzzy lines between whether we are talking about an enterprise which is basically a self-employed enterprise, or which has just maybe one or two persons, maybe family enterprise, as Anil was saying. So when you necessarily say what are the causes, I think that is more important to get into, and therefore, what are the possible ways also is more of a constructive solution to look into rather than debate so much into who's responsible for what. And I think here, when you're looking at whether it is the Indian side or any developing country or a developed country, one has to necessarily look at it from the point of view of demand and supply. At this point of time, somehow, as we can see, the workers are less organized, and relatively, I would say the MSMEs are more organized compared to them. When you start comparing between corporate sector and MSMEs, the corporate sector is far better organized compared to the MSMEs. So this is a kind of structure that we stand in the Indian context. And as far as the political system is concerned, when I actually looked at the Migrants Workers Act, it actually gives the entire responsibility of protecting the workers' interest in the hands of the government. And what it essentially says is that please employ more inspectors to check whether the workers' situation is well safeguarded or not. And we are quite familiar with the fact that there is a connivance between the MSMEs and also our inspectors, which are in the government sector. So if one has to really look for a solution in the forward level, one has to essentially go into the aspects of how the workers can be organized. And with this current COVID situation, when there will be a huge shortage of the workers, my feeling is that probably their bargaining power will go up. They will also possibly have to organize themselves, at least I would say, in the local context. So if there are, I don't know, 2 lakh people who have come from Odisha to Pune, I see no reason why 2 lakh people should not be organized in Pune to protect their own interest and also the interest at an enterprise level. And if we can have maybe our protection of the workers in Dubai, in Saudi Arabia, in I don't know other countries, we might have to do a similar kind of a situation from the state to state also, provided our political leadership is cognizant of these things and believe that if they do not take care of the migrant workers' interest, their own future or political this thing is at stake. So we are essentially looking at a kind of situation where we need to possibly look at it from a disjointed point of view and not really take a suo moto one side situation and see it from a balanced perspective to be able to say what is it that needs to be done so that the society as a whole is able to take benefit out of it, whether it is MSMEs, whether it is workers, its political situation, or it is the government as the inspector Raj. With that, I will stop and take it further with more questions.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think so. No, I absolutely agree with you that there has to be a balanced view. Uh, it is definitely lopsided to workers whose this discussion actually so we are talking about and the questions frame around that. But when we have to discuss about MSME sectors and the agriculture sector, definitely these are the workers are deeply associated with this sector, and that therefore and also what happened just now is something and also is not hidden from anybody, and that's why so this is the kind of discussion we are taking place now. I move on to the second round where we are going to take we are going to discuss around the act uh, which is going to which is still there, right? So my question with regard to the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979, and let me just tell you that I myself was completely unaware about this act until say about 2 months back, when this COVID effect started happening, and then we started looking into different literature and material. Then suddenly we found that there is an act already which was enacted in 1979. So my question to Mr. Bhardwaj, that what are the chief reasons for the non-implementation of the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979? And how do you find the act? Is the act detrimental to the progress and success of MSMEs? Sir, over to you. Am I audible, Mr. Bhardwaj? Mr. Bhardwaj?
He may be on mute.
No.
Yes. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So, sir, should I repeat the question or have you?
You please repeat the question, please.
Okay. So the question to you is, what are the chief reasons or main reasons for the non-implementation of the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979? And how do you find this act? Is this act detrimental to the progress or and success of MSMEs?
See, I'm not expert of this particular act, but what I would like to sort of dwell upon is an important issue that all the acts pertaining to labor, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. All the acts pertaining to labor are basically molded in an era before 1995, that is before coming into being of WTO. And world changed completely thereafter. The fact of the matter today is that ultimately it is the competitiveness of the industry, particularly in the case of manufacture. See, what need to be appreciated first of all is that every manufactured good in India is subjected to the discipline of imports. So if you are not competitive, if your product is not right in terms of both quality, price, etc., nobody is going to buy, things will be imported. And that's what we have seen. So labor, land, and regulatory environment, costs associated with quality of all these things ultimately results into our competitiveness. And that is specifically in the case of manufacturing, not services. And because all these laws ultimately did not reflect the changed economic realities post 1995, that is why manufacturing has been receding or is stagnant in terms of their contribution to GDP. It is only the services sector that has been growing. And please try to understand, in services, we are not competing with China, particularly those kind of services that are produced and consumed in India. So let me explain it with the help of one Caesars. See, we have a Caesars clusters in Meerut, which is approximately 65 kilometers from Delhi. Now, Caesars can be imported from China if they are not of good quality and of the right price. But the person who's cutting hair, barber, is not coming from China. That could be from India. So wherever, even if we are uncompetitive in services, the services can still survive and grow to some extent. But in terms of manufacturing, if you're not competitive, you'll be wiped out. And that is a very important issue that we have to understand. And accordingly, all legislation needed to be changed. All these legislation that we're referring, including this one, does not really reflect that what is needed. To explain what I'm trying to say is, we have a big cluster of Coimbatore and particularly Tirupur, which is one of the largest cluster, which is accounting for almost 2/3 of India's exports of garments, knitted garments from India. And there you would be surprised to see that how the people who are migrating there as labor from West Bengal, from Eastern UP, from Bihar, they have been provided best of the places to live in, provided hostels. Buses are deployed to ferry them from where they are living and to the factories. Why they are doing it? They are doing it because they are part of global value chains. And it is the global value chains pressure that is also, you can say, pressurizing the suppliers and the manufacturers to maintain certain standards of labor. The point I am trying to make is that in today's world, it is not that you alone can exploit workers the way you used to do in 70s and earlier era. If you're part of global supply chain, and increasingly people are going to become part of value chains of different kind, as things are getting organized, thanks to GST, thanks to other means of production are getting organized. So you would see that the mindset that allowed these kind of legislation to be framed and what the current realities are completely different things. And that's why I think the change in labor laws is required, is definitely required, but in the changed economic realities.
No, I agree with you, sir. I think what you said about the now India MSMEs are going to be part of the global supply chain. Definitely, things are going to change automatically because global buyers definitely going to put across certain conditions which are of a different level, in the sense, some of the laws, in fact, even have not. I remember that ethical trading initiative, which is helping their UK buyers, especially those who buy sandstones from Rajasthan and other parts of India. So they are in fact enabling or rather facilitating these Indian companies, Indian suppliers, to follow some of their labor laws and something like that, so that so their buyers actually are comfortable. So I fully agree that some change in labor laws definitely is required. So I'm just carrying forward the same question, this particular thing, to Mr. Gulati, and my question to Mr. Mukesh Gulati is that how much apt and useful is the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1979, if you know about it, in giving protection to workers' right? Why have MSMEs been found to be indifferent to the implementation of this act? What are the main barriers and factors which are responsible for the non-implementation of this act? What would be your suggestion for making the act effective? Sir, Mr. Gulati, to you.
Professor Sudhir, when you sent me this what you call note about what is going to be discussed today, I then started looking at the act, although I had read something about it in the newspaper, but that doesn't tell you much. So what I basically wanted to look at is the spirit of the law. What was it meant to do? The first thing that it said is that every migrant worker needs to be registered under the Migrants Act.
True.
This was way back in 1979. And I also tried to look at who are the major categories of the migrants. You said 12 crore people are migrants. I'm sure this figure must be right, but sometimes in 2015 or 16, the figure which was shown in one of the clippings said 8 million people.
Yeah.
Now 8 million, sorry, not 8 million, 80 million. So if you say 8 million, half of them are essentially construction workers. 40 million out of 80 million. And who are these people? They are not necessarily working with big institutions like CREDAI members who are who have, who are big real estate developers, maybe the total number of workers working with these big contractors and big developers might be 5%. But 90 or 95% of all of them are essentially working with small-time contractors spread across the country. And many of them would be coming from Odisha, Bihar, UP. These are the three states which would be, or even Jharkhand, I would say. Now, if one has to really speak to, and I did speak to one of my friends who is a contractor, and I asked him about this Migrants Act. Of course, he was not aware, but what he was basically saying, and when I looked at the act also, it gave absolute power to the government. It said that the state government and the central government has to implement the law. The only way of correcting if the things were not going on well was to hire, not to hire, to have what you call inspectors to inspect that the things were going well. And this is precisely what I told you a little while ago, that this is not the way in the current format the things can function. Mr. Bharadwaj was talking about the global supply chain and global linkages. Well, I think the MSME as a whole does not supply more than 10% of its output to exports. So maybe 90% of it is essentially still domestic economy. And if we are essentially in a domestic oriented economy, we need to necessarily look at that the only way forward, to me, it looks, is having multi-stakeholder partnerships at the local level. We have lots of what are called labor unions who are essentially national, and they are all politically affiliated. They change their tone the way they come to different kinds of parties, and who is currently in the helm of the affairs. But if we have, let us say, in a particular town or city where we have a few lakh migrant workers, and if they are organized across at the enterprise level and maybe at the industrial estate level, and then there is a relationship between the what you call industry associations, BMOs, and the trade unions, I'm sure they will be able to bond with each other to be able to take it forward. The contractors are very keen and were very keen to continue to feed their workers. They needed partial support. And if the government would have said, well, we are here to give you 50% of the money, you please ensure that your workers are paid 50%, many of the industry associations and contractors, I would say, would have possibly taken it further to bond this kind of a multi-stakeholder partnership. I think our act has basic flaws in it in the way they are constructed. It's a good idea to do registration, but registration alone will not help. One has to go further in order to, drill down what is to be done on ground and how it can be done in a spirit of togetherness.
I take your point, sir. Thank you very much. Now I move on to Mr. Arindam Datta. Sir, the question for you is, what will be the impact of agriculture reforms and other key agriculture development on the employability of migrant labor in the agriculture sector?
Sir, thanks. I think the earlier two speakers were wonderful. Anilji made this point about global supply chain. It holds true for agriculture. It holds true for SMEs. Whenever India is a part of a global supply chain, you see the global sustainability norms being enforced, and there are very strict norms to ensure traceability, quality. The ESG norms of the social S part of ESG is also covered very, very well regarding the health and safety of the workers, whether they're. So that's an excellent point. I'd really like to appreciate that. Now in agriculture, sir, when you're talking of the reforms which have just been announced, now there are two ways of looking at it. We are at a serious crisis now. The crisis is more in other sectors than in agriculture because food still needs to be eaten. But these reforms have been announced at a time when the sector is facing a huge crisis. At this point of time, like it was mentioned earlier, that this is the time for relief and sustenance. That for the next 2 to 3 months, we don't know how long this crisis is going to continue. It's a time to have cash in the hand, so that a farmer can sustain himself or herself, and if possible, have access to loans to be able to carry out the next season's sowing. Now, all the monetary policy announcements, there are two huge risks. One is the transmission risk, that from apex organizations like SIDBI and NABARD, money will pass on to banks or microfinance institutions and they will go to farmers. So first is the transmission, how much will get transmitted? And second is, are they willing to finally transmit it? So there will be a loss of transmission also, because a lot of banks will say, we don't want to give it, even if liquidity is available, even if a credit guarantee of 20% incremental is available, will not do it. So that's one issue, that that liquidity will be a problem in today's world. Now, regarding the reforms, I think what will happen, because of basically amendment of two acts. One is the Essential Commodity Act, which allows free movement of goods across states, which allows for warehouses to come up and for the ability to stock agriculture produce. And second is amendment to the APMC Act or the Marketing Act, so that free trade can happen between the markets and the farmers. Now, all this is good in spirit. It's been demanded for a long, long time, which is supposed to benefit both the farmers and the markets in terms of pricing, quality of direct purchase and all that, and cut out on the intermediation, which was huge in the agriculture sector. But the big but is that the alternative systems will need their own time to be formed. It's not that overnight new markets are going to come in. It's not overnight that commodities will start moving across boundaries, because you need time for the market to readjust itself. A lot of investment will need to be made. So my gut feeling is, in principle, it is positive, but again with a caveat, we have not seen the details. We have just heard a one-line announcement. Devil is always in the details. So I would say that it's a positive announcement. That's been the crying need of the of the hour by both farmer bodies and by the markets. But we need to see how the market reacts to be able to make it beneficial for the farmers. At times it doesn't turn out to be beneficial. They still find the farmers to be a political hot potato to directly deal with. They still like intermediaries in between. That's one. And second is, we need to see the details, because these intermediaries also, they form a very strong political constituency. So ultimately, all I'm saying, that's the medium term and long term solution. Immediate COVID, the reform is not going to help us. We need immediate relief, which has not happened in the agriculture sector to the extent it should have been done, like what was mentioned has happened to the workers in UK, right? 3 months, you have it out, cash out, you have your salary. We don't have that in India.
Okay. So Bimal, I come to you on agriculture only. So question is that agriculture is the largest sector in India to employ a large number of the population, but the condition of agriculture workers, which we all know that are a pity. What to your assessment and suggestion can improve the economic and social standards of agriculture labor in India?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Sudhir. And I think my co-panelists have made very, very important and interesting points so far. I'm going to talk a bit at a different level. My assessment is essentially that the economic growth in the last 28, 29 years in India has happened at the cost of millions of people at the bottom of socio-economic pyramid. The whole notion of trickle down the economic theory doesn't work and hasn't worked. Similarly, Thomas Piketty, the French economist, has consistently highlighted the nature and the volume of the kind of inequalities in India regularly. And COVID-19 and this lockdown essentially has laid bare the structural inadequacies of the system in India. So if we are looking at these kinds of reforms, and one more point in terms of when we started opening up the economy in 1991, while there was a particular bend and slant to that, the education system, agri system have not been appropriately opened up accordingly. And there are several other systems which so we are in the process of, since then we have been in a piecemeal kind of opening up of issues. Whenever a crisis happens, whenever a situation presents itself, we do kind of band-aid kind of activities. To me, this humanitarian crisis of workers and laborers tells me that the government and the people, concerned people, had no clue about what migrant workers are, what laborers are, and what agri workers are. They were caught off guard. They announced the lockdown, but they had no clue what's going to happen. It only emerged after they came out, after this crisis happened, and after they started again managing the situation in some ways or the other ways. And the reactionary announcements, which have been withdrawn, I guess, recently, the UP and the MP and different states coming out with saying, they're going to suspend the labor laws and they're going to do different kinds of things to attract the capital and attract the investments. Really, this is what you're thinking about dealing with the crisis is and reviving of economy? I mean, I think, and one more point I think I'm going to make here is, hearing Mukesh ji, Anil ji, and you said ETI, Ethical Trading Initiative, the standards in the value chain and all that stuff. I think why do we need to look up to them to give us standards? Mukesh ji said MSP, multi-stakeholder partnerships. Why do we not have a standard on the sustainability and value chain until today? Why have those multi-stakeholder partnerships haven't happened in India? Are we not capable? Again, I'm going to link back to the institutional quality in India. There is a reason Amartya Sen talked about and said argumentative Indians. In Europe, they talk about, the Jürgen Habermas talks about deliberative democracy. I think somewhere we are caught up in this whole challenge of understanding the institutions, creating institutions. We have always looked up to the government to make those laws, deep devils in details and all that stuff. Obviously, they're failing. How many laws and policies are made basis research and not basis whims and fancies and people who are behind all this? They have no clue what they're working on. And I'm sorry, I'm critical here, but I think this is where the whole idea of institutional processes and qualities matter, which is where the differences in other parts of the world, again, I said so-called developed parts of the world happen. The government is not the only, look at the imbalance of power between the government in India and the rest of the institutions, whether civil society, whether media, whether the businesses. It's stark. Everyone is looking up to the government. My bab, do something for us. We are in crisis. Do something for us. I mean, we are not doing. We need to, as a part of institutions and institutional quality, we have to do this ourselves also.
No, I take your point. I think Bimal has raised some concerns, which I would like either Mr. Gulati or Mr. Bhardwaj to react to. So, any of you, sir, if you want to, or even Mr. Datta, if you want to. Mr. Gulati?
Yeah, I think what Mr. Bimal just said, I could see the anguish and the pain that he is going through. And I can see that sense of guilt is there in a lot of people. Recently, there was somebody who wrote an article in newspaper saying how ashamed I feel having seen such a destitute spirit of the situation of our people. And what Mr. Arindam Datta was also saying, he's right. In the short term, when the situation is in a kind of deep trouble, I don't think we can look up to multi-stakeholder partnerships at this point of time. You cannot force them overnight. He's right when he says that at this point of time, the real need is to give relief. And the best way was that the government, it has a lot of money. It's not that it doesn't have. All that it has unlocked is Narega and some 500 rupees for a couple of months for. There is scope for at least 2 lakh crore of rupees to be passed on to the migrant workers and those who are really in distress at this point of time. This is the immediate requirement. This will also help to kickstart the economy, because once the money goes into their hands, they will obviously spend it on something which is an essential commodity, which they need it for themselves immediately. Whether it is oil, it's ghee, it is basic milk, vegetables, medicines, these are all essential commodities. The next stage, of course, immediately the I would say in a framework of 3 to 6 months. So this, what Arindam was saying, is required in the first 3 months. It's immediate requirement. From, let's say, 3 months to 9 months, when you have to kickstart the economy, the immediate requirement would be that those workers who are not willing to go back, can the government get into what is called a matchmaking exercise by doing skill mapping and finding out who are there, and also ensuring that when these workers go back to the cities, they are not left into the distress situation. This is something which the government can do in the 3 to 9 months or maybe 1 year. But something which the governments need to do in a kind of longer term view, which I would say from 9 months or 1 year to 2 to 3 years, once the UP government, Bihar government, Odisha government can see that there are people who are involved here, we are talking about attracting foreign investment. Why not investors from within the country? Why not investors from Pune and Bombay and Delhi, and so that they can go and set up their enterprises there? If you look at the entire value chain, there are many things in which part of the value chain can still be done in the local areas in the hinterland where the migrant workers are. And a lot of labor is required for the primary processing, the finishing operations, the more complicated the mechanization required or the machine required operations can be essentially done in the cities. So maybe there is need for even decentralization of the enterprises also. And here I believe that there is need for not only enterprises to relook at their own individual business models, but also start working with their industry associations to see how they can have the newer models by working out where you are not, pulling out the workers unnecessarily from their hinterland, but you are passing on parts of your operations there and making some of these migrant workers who have that capacity, maybe many of them are coming from abroad, and they might have a little bit of money also, so they can be promoted to start their own primary level operations. So I'm looking at the whole situation in a kind of immediate relief and a kickstarting in the medium term, when you are basically helping and the matchmaking exercises and helping both sides, and then also promoting grassroots level industrialization at the local areas.
Okay, well, I got your point. I think so. Now we are going to move on to the next level of the next round of questions, which is again on the employment per se, and I'm going to just show this slide so that so you can have a look at it, and then quickly I'm going to ask you just in 1.5 minutes each, you can just answer this question. So can you see the slide? Is the slide visible to you?
Yeah,
Yes.
it is.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So this is about the employability and everything. Now CMIE, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, they have come out with a kind of their report which says that this is what 14 million jobs within the age group of 25 to 9 age bracket actually. So they have lost. Similarly, 33 million in their 30s actually. So they have lost in April. So they are given, and then unemployment rate, according to their study, has gone up to 27.11 in May. I think so. This is what is the problem. So with this problem, I'm going to ask again one round of questions, and then I request you that if you can finish in 1.5 minutes, so that we have. And Varun, Aditya, and Sivaditya, please get ready to ask your questions to the panel. So after this round, you are going to ask. I'm going to allow you to ask questions. So the first question, I think the first question is to Bimal. Yes. So various reports say that workers in MSME across the globe have lost jobs But why is that the India's story of job loss in the MSME sector only making news, while job loss anywhere, be it India or the Europe or the Americas, uh, has more or less similar kind of socioeconomic consequences? To your assessment, what are the reasons why?
Well, to me, imageries are very powerful. They convey a lot of message. In India, the kind of humanitarian crisis that we have witnessed in the last 2 months, I think no other nation has seen, and the international media in particular, Indian media also to some extent have highlighted this. So while the impacts and implications at different levels have happened in different countries, perhaps the way this messaging has gone out, India has kind of singled out in this whole process and experienced and like I said earlier, this structural inadequacies that have come out in this process of the system that have come out in the process have clearly presented a challenge and a situation for all of us and for the government in particular to kind of look at it. And that's me the primary reason of India standing out in this whole crisis in a way.
Thank you, Vimal. So, Mr. Bhardwaj, to you, the question is to ensure the well-being of the migrant workers, what measures should be taken by the host states? How can the returning migrants be employed in their home states? There are reports that even if all the economic activities achieve the optimal level, not all migrant workers will be employed. What is your view on that, sir?
What I feel is that this needs to be spread in sequence. Currently, the most important priority should be to secure life and dignity of people returning by ensuring safe travel, stay, food, subsistence allowance. There is no excuse whatsoever with any government who cannot ensure this for people who are coming back. Now, at least for 2 months, and then they need to be profiled. A small percentage may have skills that could be redeployed, absorbed. But my guess is, or the limited interaction I had with some of these people in Noida, that majority of them are skillless, are unskilled workers, may have been basically doing all kind of odd jobs like loaders and working in the construction sites. So bulk may be provided odd jobs like under Manrega. Then skill development programs, self-employment, art, craft skill could be imparted later on. But still, bulk. Let's understand this, that bulk would still find simple jobs as construction workers. Migration is not bad. It needs to be. It has been handled very badly, but that doesn't mean that migration is a bad thing. Migration is a good thing. All Indians have been migrating to the Western world and sending money to India, and is propping up India's economy for 40, 50 years. Similar thing has been going on, that people from the poorer states have been going to the richer states, working there and sending money home, propping up and sustaining the domestic economy of their states. It is not a bad thing, but it needs to be managed and dignity has to be ensured. And I think support infrastructure, support institutions, I think what Bimal has said is correct, that we need to see that perhaps in order to address some of these problems that have come out, we need to envision new type of institutions who can support them and who can also in a way be helpful to manufacturing and service industries that might be in need of workers. So otherwise, what happens is sometimes there is a glut of workers on one side and there is extreme shortage of workers on the other side. Similar things will happen if we don't have reliable, trustworthy institutions, efficient institutions working.
Thank you, sir. Mukesh, question to you. Why host states whose economy depends on migrant workers ignored them during COVID-19 pandemic? There is a view that there was no communication between government, civil society, and migrants, and it led to the exodus of migrants. How will you like to analyze the entire mess-ups which eventually impacted the workers only? Very brief, sir.
Actually, I don't need to say anything on this, because as far as the host countries is concerned, this is unpardonable. This is all I can say. I don't have to give any reasons why they were not doing it. I think the only thing we should say, they were not doing it. It is very unfortunate. It is morally wrong. This is ethically wrong. And when the people will basically, mentally rate the state, they will always remember whether Delhi was, positive towards the migrant workers or Bombay was positive. And when they have to make choices in future, they will make choices on their own and say, okay, Bombay, they did not take care or they took a lot of care for us, and therefore we must go there. People will form their own impressions. This is just not, this is something which is really, I would say, just unpardonable. And there's nothing really to add on to it. This has hurt the consciousness of the nation, I would say.
Yes. Thank you. So, Datta Sahab, to you, the last question of this round. So, there are reports which indicate that farmers immediately need cash for the Kharif season, which you touched upon also. How can it be ensured in the short and long term? What role can institutions like RoboBank play in such challenging situations?
Now, regarding the cash position, as I said, there are two forms. Immediately, there's relief, which needs to be cash transfer to ensure that people live in dignity. I think that point has been made well enough by a lot of speakers. They need to survive. That's the first. Forget about the business, the Kharif crop. First, with dignity, they need access to food, access to basic requirements. That's a must, and we have not done that well. Let's be very clear. Again, it was mentioned, what's the fiscal stimulus vis-a-vis the entire package? And we can do different number crunching, but basically it's a very small amount going to very few people. Now, for the loans, again, the problem is it's not going to be easy. As I said, the farmers are going to go back to the money lenders. Money lenders will also be choked for liquidity for this particular season. And it's going to be extremely difficult for them to mobilize resources from mainstream financial institutions. As it is, more than 50% farmers, even pre-COVID, were not, accessing financing from financial institutions. But that, I think, is going to increase unless suddenly we see the cooperative banks, the rural branches becoming extremely efficient. I don't think that's going to happen. Role of Rabobank, well, we just have one branch in the country, but all I can say is we are a cooperative bank. It's the largest cooperative bank in the world. We are in the process of quickly mobilizing a COVID response fund for farmer producer organization and AgTech or any channel that reaches out to smallholder farmers. But understanding our capabilities, it will just be an amount which will be enough for only a certain percent of the farmers. It's a job for all banks to work together and to open up for the eligible farmers.
Okay. So thank you. I think now I will move to only three persons. Two of them are our students, and Aditya is my young colleague. So Aditya, if you are there, if you can listen to me, just ask your question and who you are asking this question to, just make it pinpointed. Aditya, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So my question is not to person specific, so it's a general question and anybody can answer this. My question would be about the revival and survival of MSME after this pandemic, after post-pandemic, how this MSME will is going to survive. Further, I would like to get into the Atmanirbhar package, which was recently being given by the government of India. So it is supposed that it's a long-term measure and not a very quick relief for the MSME. So how you see this package, and by what time frame? Is it any kind of time frame which by which the MSME can actually start getting benefited? And yes, sir. Thank you.
So Bhardwaj sir,
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just a quick two-line answer. One is, for any business which is providing services or products, the demand needs to kick in. It's as simple as that. Liquidity is not going to help you to grow your business. Liquidity can make you survive for a certain crisis if you have a liquidity problem. But taking on more liquidity without the demand kicking in is a bigger disaster. So ultimately, without demand, there is no business we can pick up. I'll just stop here for the other experts, please.
Okay, Bhadwar sir, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. See, let me first take the question that this 3 lakh crore rupees package, which has made quite a bit of noise. So first of all, it is a proposition of loan whereby Government of India has agreed to stand guarantee if the banks give additional 20% to the existing borrowers within a specified limit of having less than 100 crore turnover, less than exposure of 25 crore and so on. So there are several caveats in it. First of all, you have to be an existing borrower in order to access this, keeping in view that more than 90% of MSMEs do not have access to institutional funds. So that means they would not be in a position to benefit from it. So it is important. It would be helpful to those who are eligible. That may be a small category, but that may be the organized ones. Secondly, there has been an announcement of a fund that would be used to help stressed MSMEs. Naturally, MSMEs that are going through this process of difficult times, many of them would find it very difficult to sail through on their own and might be stressed, and they might be required to some kind of access to financial assistance for revival. That fund may be used. And there's a big may. So far, many of these you can say experiments or initiatives have not been really very successful. Revival in MSMEs have been very, very something very difficult to achieve because of so many reasons. Time is short. I can't explain it right now. Now, coming back to the question of that, how much and when the revival may take place, and what steps perhaps we could take to hasten that revival. See, one important issue to understand is that this pandemic has been by far too complex and has proved almost every major, prophecies wrong. We have been saying that we've been listening that, by March, there would be peak in India, then came April, then came May. Now we are saying maybe June. Then somebody is saying that there could be a wave 2 somewhere around October, November. So that means the revival is not near around, and that is why in one of the surveys that we have conducted, that people are shedding jobs to reduce their fixed expenses because they are very uncertain about the immediate future. The long-term future is fine. Long-term future is, after all, we are 1.2 billion people plus, and there is pent-up demand in so many areas, young population. So long-term, everything looks all right. But in the short term, the challenges are of demand, and there the Keynesian economics may be required to be kicked in. Government may be required to tap funds and do spends, and whether and how they would be able to generate that money from its own resources, and especially in a situation where its own revenues are falling, GST is falling, income tax is falling. All these are challenges that government will have to grapple. But one advantage is, or you can say the silver lining is, that the global supply chains are also in a shift, are in transformation, and India may be one of the destination for attracting investment. And if we play our cards right, if we ensure or we assure investors that we can provide rule of law, and we can ensure taking or you can say solving the problems or concerns of the investors, then I think we have all the right ingredients of the local demand, local infrastructure, in terms of human resources and financial institutions to take us to a higher growth path, maybe from the third quarter onwards.
Thank you, sir. Quickly, now I'm going to ask Varun. Varun, you have questions. Are you there, Varun? Varun?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much
Questions.
for
Immediately,
this session, sir. Sir, I have 3-4 questions, 4 to be
One
precise.
question, you
Am
ask
I
one question, Varun. We are running short of time, so just
okay? We talked about how migrant laborers are getting affected in this whole crisis in the MSME and agriculture sector. But my question is whether what kind of steps should have been taken for the entrepreneurs in the MSME sector, so that they could revive the economy, and they could do something for their own enterprises. So what kind of steps should have been taken or could have been taken for the entrepreneurs?
Okay. Anybody from the panel?
See, what steps could have been taken when we have been under lockdown?
Quickly, sir. I think
We were not allowed to meet. We were not open. So, I mean, sitting home, there's very little that you could do except doing webinars. That's what we are doing.
Yeah. Datta sir?
No further comments, please. It's a difficult question because, as it said, I mean, during the lockdown period, frankly, except for immediate relief, even entrepreneurs, if that's the question, entrepreneurs, the smaller entrepreneurs, they needed relief at that point of time. It was a time to really open up the war chest. That's my personal feeling. If this is not the time, I don't know when the time is. It's the biggest crisis we are going through. So they should have just opened up the war chest and, passed on cash to including the small entrepreneurs who were at the mercy of this crisis. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Sivaditya?
Yes, sir. Giving out my questions are actually 3 questions are there. So I'll try to
one question
complete. Okay, one question I have to then select which one will be the better. So giving out money to Indian population to take care of the demand side of the economy, but there are 2 options right now. One is printing money. In that case, money will lose its value and inflation will happen. And 2 is taking loan from the World Bank or etc. So what should be the ideal way among these 2? And if there are other ways that I don't know, that also can be discussed.
Okay,
Sir, I don't think we need to go to the World Bank or we need to print the money. At the national level, I think the government of India has a budget of about 30 lakh crore. All that it has to do is to shift some of the revenue budget into giving to the people and shift part of the money which has to go to, which is called long-term planned expenditure like infrastructure and all that, to shift it here. 2 lakh crore is pittance at the national level. I mean, I think 40 lakh crore is the national budget and 40 lakh crore is the state level budget. We are looking at 80 lakh crore. The requirement at the relief level currently for the 3 months is not more than 2 lakh crore. The second part, I think, which was raised was what is it that the government could have done even when the lockdown was there. The first thing that it could have done is 5 lakh crore needs to be paid back to the entrepreneurs in the MSME sector.
Exactly.
Pay them back. This would unleash liquidity. You are talking about 3 lakh crore of loan from the banks and 5 lakh has to be paid as dues to them, which they have every right to ask for. The second thing which the government can do, rather than abrogating what is called laws of the labor in favor of the foreign investors, the government could have actually come up with what is called ease of doing business for micro and tiny entrepreneurs. Because all the laws which are there applicable for the corporate sector and the big enterprises are exactly the laws for the tiny and individual self-employed entrepreneurs also. I mean, I'm making a kind of sweeping statement. I'm aware about it. But as far as the enterprises themselves is concerned, I think we need to understand now that the government is saying, please be Atmanirbhar. It's not saying that it's saying, please fend for yourself. And when it says fend for yourself, and if the government takes time before it says that we are willing to now give you some money, I think the government has done a great job in expanding Manrega. The government has done a great job in unleashing the loan portfolio. But the government has not done a great job by not taking care of the migrants. It has not done a great job by not paying the money which is due to the MSMEs, and it has not done a great job by giving the relief which it should have given to the people. Now, given that situation, what is it that the entrepreneurs can do? It is sure that because of these problems, many enterprises will have to downsize, and they must. There's nothing wrong in contracting. If the money doesn't flow into my house, I will obviously try to make sure that I manage with lesser money. I don't have to necessarily make the entire range of products. I don't have to go to all the customers. I can necessarily focus only on those customers who are willing to pay back quickly. And I can also look at possibilities of collaborating with the other entrepreneurs to make small 2 or 3 partnership-based organizations. And this is what I think is the meaning of Atmanirbhar. Please fend for yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Gulati. Towards the end, in fact, we have one gentleman with us, Mr. Anand Mohan Tiwari. He was an IAS and former additional chief secretary with Government of Gujarat. So I would like to invite him to give his concluding remarks of this webinar and his views. So over to you, sir, for 3 minutes. And so I'm so sorry, actually. So the time is running sort of.
Okay, thank you, Sinha Sahab. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. See, I have actually taken notes very carefully, but one thing has been missed out about SMEs. I have worked in 2-3 industries also, and we were dealing with some of the MSMEs, and we had plenty of complaints about their work, their quality. So one day we decided that we'll send our team to improve them. Until they improve, we'll not deal with them. In 15 days, actually, we were able to transform those organizations, those small MSMEs. Now, I think they require, along with credit, they require a lot of R&D support and technical support, which I think in the recent package, government has forgotten. In fact, I have a suspicion that nobody in the government knows about migrants or MSMEs. And we are just trying to do some lip service. If you see the packages, the migrant package or the MSME package, it is just a, okay, something had to be done, we are doing it. But it remains that, see, the migrants are pushing the economy of Gujarat, Bombay, Indore, and other industrial hubs. Host state doesn't like them, doesn't trust them, and there are reasons for that, because if you look at the so there's some data, 60% of policemen are under impression that migrants are criminals, and there's the same problem in USA. They also that they are the lazy people, unemployed, drugs, all sort of things. Migrants, because of different culture, migrants carry a sort of animosity in the host state, and that was one reason why the Migrants Act was never implemented by any state, because the onus was on the host state to implement these acts, and nobody was interested. I wonder why we never went to the High Court or Supreme Court to get this act, which is beautifully designed. There's nothing wrong with this act. Somehow nobody knew, and the migrants didn't have the voice. I agree that post 1995, some modifications, improvements are required in this act to make India more competitive. That point is okay. Now, the question was that why their home states also ignored them. They remit a big amount to the eastern UP, Bihar and Odisha, and say a major portion of the rural economy of the small and marginal or landless farmers is dependent on the migrant remittances. Most probably because they are poor. Again, we don't know about poor people. That is one problem. Or maybe they don't have votes, because in their host state also they're not in the voters list, and even if they are in their home state in the voters list, they're not going to go to vote. A third problem why it was never implemented properly, or they were a silent voice, was because they belong to mainly outside MSME. They belong to contractors, and not with the main employer. Like main company never employs these people. They are coming through through contractors. And wherever I have worked, there was a general feeling that they are not our responsibility. The contractor has to take care of them, and he is legally responsible. So I think this also this segment of thing has to be changed, and there should be responsibility of the main employer. That has to be modified in the act. At the same time, now we cannot expect much from the government because there is actually no money. Even if we think about Keynesian say method, doubt whether the system will allow the government to spend 50 or 60% of the deficit of the budget, which happened in USA, UK in the late 40s last century. So what is to be done? I believe if we just get the Migrants Act, Interstate Migrants Act implemented properly by intervention of the courts, and courts monitor and civil society takes it up, I think that will be one good thing. Second thing is that MSME should be strong enough to say bear the bill of the provisions of the Act. For that, I think there is plenty of things can be done by providing them R&D support and technical support for say improving the quality of their products. There is one more thing is that the way they were treated or the way they left the state, it was very clear that they also don't trust the system because system has never treated them as citizens of this country. So there is a need to bring a intermediary organization like civil society or community-based organizations or some other thing, and government should actively pursue them to ensure that these people get their due. If you look at the data, I attended another similar webinar on migrants, and the data which came out through their one of speaker survey is actually shocking, and we'll be ashamed of being citizens of this country. More than 50% do not have access to any social safety net. If the existing schemes are not available. Now we were talking about agriculture, say credit requirements. What happened to our famous Kisan credit card? Every farmer was supposed to have been, anybody who had land was supposed to have been covered. And if you look in the field, the coverage is very, very minimal. So I think if the existing schemes which are available, they are extended to these people properly, including the farmers and MSME sector. And MSME requires technology input. That is one thing which so far we have missed. And migrants should be, in fact, the host state doesn't have any interest in these people. And this is not only in Gujarat or India, it is the global problem. So another institution has to be created to ensure that they get their dues. With this, I'll close. Thank you, Professor Sinha.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I think you have been always very supportive, and I just want to tell all the speakers that some of the questions which I asked were framed by himself. So that is a kind of support, in fact, he has been giving to us. So now we have, thank you very much, everyone. So I just give it to Mr. Shivans for proposing the vote of thanks. Shivans. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I thank all the speakers and all the participants to the webinar, Mr. Bhardwaj, Mr. Datta, Professor Arora, Mr. Gulati, and lastly, Tiwari ji for his final comments. I also thank Professor Sinha for hosting this webinar. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to see you back with us very soon on more pressing issues and getting your expertise and views, which have originated from your years of experience. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bimal. Thank you, Mr. Datta. Thank you, Tiwari Saab, and thank you, Bhardwaj Saab and Gulati ji. Thank you very much.